Hey everyone, today I want to talk about something pretty big that happened this past week in the tech industry. As you're all probably aware, AWS suffered a pretty significant outage this week that kind of spanned, all over the world and, mainly right all over the United States. And, I personally, at my place of employment, this had some effect, not like a huge effect, but, there was services and tools being impacted, that came up to my attention, I'll say. But essentially today I just want to talk about like why, what are some takeaways from the AWS outage and why, we should be more careful, like not just me, but everyone going forward. Now, for those of you who don't know, AWS is Amazon Web Services. It's basically Amazon's way of having, cloud computing, right? Cloud stuff like that. AWS is actually one of, I think they were probably one of the first companies to do cloud computing, if I'm not mistaken. I know a lot of their stuff is, some people that I talk to, they don't like AWS because it feels old and clunky, but I think it's just because they've been around for so long. That some of the tooling and some of the ways of doing things might seem kind of obsolete. But, AWS, I've used it before. It's pretty nice. I used it in college, doing some, like, I guess, example projects, stuff like that. Nothing, that I'm going to be doing in the future. And I know a lot of companies use it too, right? Because AWS, it's pretty reliable. There's lots of options. It's widely known. There's many certifications you can do, stuff like that, and it's overall just good knowledge. And if you can know AWS, you can pick up on the others really quickly. Not saying that the others are you can't do that, like vice versa, but essentially, right. The main issue happened with AWS was basically a DNS issue in the form of, I think it was their Dynamo database API. There was some DNS misconfiguration with that. So then basically the whole outage was caused by DNS requests that were kind of getting backed up, sort of like if you get stuck at like a stoplight when it stops working, right? Kind of getting backed up like that as everybody has to kind of go through a four-way stop. That's kind of a pretty simple analogy of how it went. Some people might describe it differently, but that's what I say. So basically, in essence, we can say it was a DNS issue. So basically, when you type in www.linux.com or something, right? DNS is like the address book of the internet. So when you type in linux.com, it actually can look up that IP that it belongs to and then can send you there. Basically without DNS, it's hard to get anywhere. For example, if you were trying to do something this past week when AWS was down and there's no DNS resolution, you're kind of out of luck. And there's a lot of back-end services that have AWS. I've seen it before where I right-click on an app, like on a picture of a website, and it says like little AWS blah blah blah. So there's a lot of like storage and stuff going on. So it's in more places than you think. So it did have a pretty significant impact. But the biggest thing I think to take away from this is if you're gonna go up in the cloud or do whatever you want to do, right? I mean, I don't do cloud stuff, but because I don't like having someone else being in control of the full machine and everything like that. But if you're gonna do full cloud stuff, my advice, and probably people have said this before, is diversify what you have and split up your assets. Because as we saw, basically people were saying like, hey, lots of the internet is down right now because AWS is offline, and and that's not good. And I know AWS has different regions and different data centers, but one of their biggest, and I think there's their oldest data center in Northern Virginia, has a lot of, I think, key routing that goes to there and DR stuff. And, basically, it's not just having, different cloud providers, but also having, valid DR plans that don't rely on one location, hence how AWS did. Now, full disclaimer, I don't know their architecture. I do networking as a job, but I don't know what they all have and what the topology looks like and all that kind of stuff. But that would be my advice: is you have to make it so basically that when you fail over, it doesn't rely on one data. You gotta have multiple failover and DR locations and worst case scenarios. But probably the biggest thing would be to diversify your cloud landscape. I know there's obviously Azure, GCP. I know there's other smaller ones as well, like Alibaba, stuff like that. I mean, like I said, I'm not a cloud person, so I know some companies are actually going back to hosting in their own data centers if they really want to. So there is that option too if you kind of want to take a step backward. Having your own infrastructure is nice because then you control it, you own it, but then it comes with that cost of setting it up, maintenance. That's another person you have to pay, head you have to count. I mean, personally, I would rather host my own stuff just because that's how I am. I like to have my own control. I mean, the cloud is nice though because you can just spin up something instantly and boom, it's there, and it's on the cloud computing company to take care of the maintenance, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, those are my main takeaways. It's kind of a little, it can be a little like scary almost if what happened this week. It kind of shows like how much of the internet relies on AWS in a day to day, and I think it should be more of a message to diversify and explore alternate solutions and make sure DR and failover and everything is tested properly. But yeah, that's my opinion. I'd be interested to hear what you guys say below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.